Today I wanted to do a kind of hands-on review of Fallout VR. This has proven to be one of the more difficult videos I've tried to capture of a video game recently. This is particularly as I wanted to show you actually using these guys. Now at the moment these aren't actually in the correct place for the headset, so things on the screen are going to be slightly weird. But there are a few things that I wanted to kind of discuss and go over that actually make this game somewhat annoying to use. Don't get me wrong, it's a great adaptation of Fallout, although I do feel that it's a little bit expensive. Now, this actually comes with two different ways of moving around the world, and this at the moment I'm using free movement mode, and you'll notice that when I move around, you'll be able to see that at the side of the screen you get like a little visionette, which you can see kind of around here, around the edges. So if you watch whilst I'm moving around, or stop moving around, you can see that that's actually configurable, but that just allows you to kind of get an idea and sense of when you're moving around. Now, one of the real issues with this kind of free movement is that if you are someone who gets kind of motion sickness really easily, you can quite easily feel really nauseous walking around. And in the actual controller, if I just zoom onto that, depending on where I place my finger, it will actually determine how far I move. Now the thing is, this is actually now pretty fast, and I can tell you with a VR headset you are going to be pretty sick to the stomach within seconds. It would have been nice if I could have set my maximum speed to how much I want to move around, so I don't accidentally end up, puking all over my living room just because I happen to put my hand in the wrong place. The other kind of really annoying thing is with snap turning here, which you can see here. If you put your finger here, for example, nothing happens. It's got to be dead in the actual curve bit here, and that's something that I found also quite annoying when I was first playing this. I didn't actually realise that was going to be a problem. I actually kind of thought, hey, why is nothing working? Why do the controls not work? Because you can quite easily not realise that you're actually pressing on the edge here, and I don't know if you can hear that, I'm actually pressing that, but you've really got to get it inside the actual corner. And that's something that's kind of really annoyed me, so I've kind of wanted to mention those two little things here. So although you do have teleportation movement, I find that to be really slow and laborious. So if you're someone who kind of like teleportation and don't really get on with free motion, then you're going to find it's actually quite difficult to use it. One of the other really annoying things that I wanted to also cover was the use of the PipBoy. And, actually, whilst I now have an enemy on screen, I might as well go over the VAT system, which we can see here. Now, this kind of gives you a kind of Terminator vision heads-up display, whereas you can see here, I kind of get a percentage hit rating, which basically tells me how likely I am to hit that particular part of the target. So this is actually something I really I really like. But this is actually quite difficult to use because depending on how well you're actually holding your gun and basically moving your arm around, these fine little movements that basically, oh god, so let me kill that. I'm actually playing on very easy, and you can see that things die pretty quickly. However, trying to work out which part of the enemy to fire at and basically which limb to attack is actually quite difficult, because depending on how much it does take a lot of fine movement in real life to actually basically work out which is the best way to to attack the enemy. Now, going back to the PipBoy, when you raise your arm, you'll get the PipBoy, and it is absolutely massive. So the two issues I have with this is that it's enormous, and also it's really difficult to navigate. So to do that, I'm actually moving around this controller. Obviously this is the other hand, just to illustrate it. I'm going to use the right hand controller to show you what's going on here, but I'm actually operating with the left hand. So what makes this difficult is that you have to hold this thing in a bit of an awkward angle, and then this then inverses the controls. But more annoying is that navigating the menus, it's really, really easy to accidentally, particularly in the inventory mode, to switch between the wrong menus. So where you have weapons and apparel and aid and all sorts, you'll find that you can quite easily, if you're trying to scroll down, so for example, scrolling down like this, because obviously, being an analog input, you don't, unless you're going down in like quite a deliberate downwards motion, it's quite easy to accidentally go diagonally, and this will actually end up inside the wrong and menu system. So you can see here my thumb movement, which is tracking down here. You'll see that this is actually quite an awkward angle to hold, because as soon as you are not holding it at this sort of rotation, and for example you're in a more natural resting position, obviously you'll then lose the PipBoy. So the other thing to notice is that when you have things like armor and other stats, down this section of the screen is actually quite difficult to read, and that's because obviously with the Vive, the outer parts of the screen are less sharp, so that makes it really difficult to try and figure out what kind of armor you're wearing. So if I go back into the armor setting, don't forget this is really sensitive, this menu, so it'll end up flicking annoyingly in between these kind of menus. And you can see down at the bottom here, which is down here, you'll see that it takes just a slight touch to basically accidentally flick between the wrong menus. Now, bearing in mind, as I said before, this little icon here, which shows what defense and energy you have, is actually really difficult to see with the Vive. I'm obviously filming my TV, so it's easier to see that. So we're just fixing the color there. Yeah, and this is really difficult to actually operate, I find. I wish they'd actually make this slightly less sensitive in menus, or perhaps made this more wraparound when you're in the perk menu, for example, and that's actually like a static screen, which isn't in VR and actually very easy to use. The other thing that actually kind of really annoys me about the PipBoy as well is when you're using it, although more immersive, the game doesn't actually pause. And if you're trying, for example, change armor weapons during the middle of a fight, then you're going to find that quite difficult to swap out and maneuver around. So you might have accidentally equipped the wrong arm, or disabled it, or taken it off, or for whatever reason, and then suddenly you're in the middle of a fight. The other thing to note though is if I go to the clicking on the middle, you'll notice for some reason that the default action is drop. Now, this would have been great if it had been favorite or anything, or anything other than drop, because I find that actually quite difficult to navigate with these menus, and I don't really want to start dropping my arm and everything else on the floor to then have to pick up. So actually, if you squeeze the hand controllers to go back, or just do that, and now, I don't know how, if you're someone who likes to use melee weapons rather than shooting, I think you'll find this to be quite a difficult game, because you obviously want to run pretty fast, and if you are prone to motion sickness, the speed I'm running at now is actually going to be pretty difficult. So I'm kind of sticking to shooting weapons. So if you're someone who doesn't like using guns, I think you're going to have some trouble running around and trying to hit people. Now, the other thing to note, obviously, this affects your direct combat and moving out of, like, for example, grenades and things thrown at you, because you obviously can't move around fast enough without actually starting to feel pretty motion sick. And I've now walked into basically a battlefield here. The other thing to mention is when you're actually moving around with these guys, it's really easy to accidentally grab it, or when you just want to stand still, and the slightest touch of your palm can basically activate the movement. So suddenly you might be jerking around in this kind of sort of motion, which on this screen doesn't look so bad, but when you're in a VR environment, moving around in kind of like a weird fashion when you didn't intend to is actually really nauseating. So there's a few things to kind of keep in mind. Potentially, if you're trying to loot something because you're having to click directly in the center, you might then end up finding yourself moving around in this kind of sort of movement when you're actually just trying to click this button here. But if you accidentally click it here or kind of anywhere around it, it'd actually be quite difficult to loot something. So suddenly you kind of feel like your stomach is going to go because you're now moving around when you didn't intend to. So again, if you're one of these people that find it very difficult to move around in VR, or you get motion sickness very easily, then bear that in mind. Again, the kind of Terminator vision here again, which works really well. This doesn't pause the game, just slows it down. So that's, you can kind of imagine that perhaps you're working all of this out in like a really high speed. But it's kind of a nice touch. So just showing you how this works again. I'm hoping this isn't one of the ones. So there you go. That might throw something at me because I'm not going to be able to move out of the way quickly enough. So 88% chance there. There we go. Killed him. So that works really nicely, although I can't really show you that on video. And obviously this then gives you situational awareness. So anytime you want to basically see if you're in a safe environment, you can just look around and basically see if anything pops up. So this is kind of a nice kind of future combat kind of scenario where you have all this additional information about what's going around you, which is actually quite good because you won't be able to move fast because obviously you don't want to throw up everywhere. However, your enemies will be able to close in on you quite quickly. So those are kind of a few niggly things that have really annoyed me playing this, and I think this that could generally limit how much you actually you can play this game, maybe for like an hour at a time or hour and a half max.